This is Elected, a podcast for women in and around Canadian politics. And I'm your host, Sarah Elder Chaminara. And today I have a very special guest, Orit Sulitzeanu, who is the executive director of the Association of Rape Crises Centers in Israel. Hello, Orit.
Hello.
I wish I could say that in any other circumstances, it would be a pleasure to have you on the podcast today. But given the topic that we're discussing today, I wish that you and I in our lives never had to cross paths.
You're totally correct.
So the topic that we're going to be talking about today is obviously one of extreme sensitivity. And I'm going to start by saying that I've been very nervous about having this conversation with you because I want to be respectful and sensitive to not only you, but to anyone who may be listening to this conversation who is a victim themselves of sexual violence, and to, uphold in some way the survivors and the victims of October 7th. And having this conversation with you and hopefully allowing an open mind in anyone who's listening to this, specifically women in Canada who are listeners of the podcast, who are skeptical or hesitant to understand and believe what happened. And so that's the purpose of our conversation today. So your organization is the umbrella organization for what I understand to be the 9 rape crisis centers in Israel. So you oversee that as the umbrella organization, and your organization is the only one in Israel, to my understanding, with the main mission of combating sexual violence.
Yes, we were actually established over 30 years ago by the local rape crisis centers that are scattered all over the country, and all of them are NGOs that were initiated and established by women. Some of them are 40 years old and others are younger. And we were established by them because they understood they need an organization who will deal with the macro level, change laws, change policies, work in the governmental and the parliamental system in order to combat sexual violence and increase the rights of the survivors of this kind of violence.
And your organization's mission is to combat sexual violence at the national level, which you just spoke to, by making the silent voices of victims heard.
Exactly.
And so I think your work, before October 7th was probably primarily focused on, the inner workings and the daily violence and sexual violence against women in Israel. You might not have ever thought that your work would ever take on such a global context, but it has. So, the use of sexual violence on October 7th as a weapon of war silenced many of its victims because they were also tragically and horrifically murdered, and are now unable to have their voices heard. What can you tell me about what happened that on October 7th and the sexual violence that was perpetrated?
Okay, on the 7th of October, we all woke up in Israel to hear missiles. I live in Tel Aviv, and I woke up, I was about to go jogging at 6:30 in the morning. But when we heard these missiles, which was it took us by surprise. I text my friends from my jogging group and say, no, we're not going to go jogging today. There are missiles, it's dangerous. But none of us has anticipated to hear missiles suddenly in Saturday morning. And a few hours afterwards, I heard from my daughter, who is in the army, that she got information from her friends in the army that a soldier was kidnapped. That was maybe 1 or 2 hours later. Very quickly, we thought it's unbelievable. How come a soldier is kidnapped? This is something But a few hours afterwards, our world collapsed. We understood that we were entering a horrific era. We did not understand exactly what. No one in Israel could anticipate this scenario. It's like the most horrible nightmare. One day, 2 days afterwards, we already, as the Association of Rape Crisis Centers, received information, rumors that sexual violence took place. Because we are an organization that is really has a very strong place in the Israeli society, and we're very well connected to all of the community who deals with sexual violence. Actually, we started to get information. We couldn't believe what we know now is the truth. Who in Israel could believe such a terror attack with using sexual violence as a weapon of war could take place in the modern, developed, democratic country like Israel, which is the same as Canada and United States. Israel today is a very progressive, developed country, high-tech nation. Many of the newest inventions are taking place here with very good science. Who could believe that? Nobody. Nobody could believe that you're sitting in your house, even if there are terror attacks in Israel with missiles, and these things happen from time to time. And you also have from time to time people being shot and killed, like today. I don't know if you heard that, but today the 2 Arab terrorists that worked in Israel without having a license, they killed already one woman, and they went with their cars and stabbed with a knife and killed and injured 19 people. But these things is one thing. Unfortunately, we're used to that. It's very sad because as an Israeli, I want peace with my neighbors, and I wish we have peace. And we have two countries, and we live a quiet life. We're still not there. But no one ever in Israel's history could have imagined this thing has happened. For me as an Israeli and a woman who works, I'm already 10 years the executive director of the Association of Rape Crisis Centers. Reading about the sexual violence as a weapon of war is something to read about other countries, less developed countries, something that you read in the newspaper and you never think it will happen in your country. It's really unbelievable. But as I said, we got the information a few days afterwards from more than a dozen of different resources, not from from the survivors. The survivors are only, most of them, as you said, were killed, horribly and tragically killed in the most horrible way. But there are survivors. We do not know how much, and we will never know how much, but I know that from different resources. And there are also witnesses that saw. Also, we know about 2 formal testimonies, and I will give you after all the information what exists. And I'm sure, and I know personally that there are more, but the information we have is not from direct survivors, because these people, after suffering such a horrific, traumatic incident, cannot talk, cannot speak. And I believe that it will take them a long time to speak. And I can tell you personally, because being myself a daughter of a Holocaust survivor, I lived in a house with secrets. I lived in a house. My mother was in Auschwitz as a girl. My mother never said anything, never spoke, but there was a secret in the life, a big secret. And I totally, because also for my personal history, and also because I know so many survivors, I totally understand. And every woman who works and man who works with survivors of sexual trauma understands that how hard is it to talk about it. So the woman who survived, and maybe men, a few. We do not know how much exists, but there are a few. Yeah, now they have to deal with the most horrible trauma a human being, I think, in my opinion, can even think about it. But what has happened, that because we got this information from direct resources as we got, not from the media, not from social media, no, only information that we personally got from people we know, that are first responders, therapists, doctors, these kind of people, we understood this is real, because we couldn't even, we didn't believe that in the beginning. It was so awkward, so something unexpected. So what we did, we wrote a letter, which was dated, if I remember correctly, the 11th of October to the Red Cross, asking them to do the best they can to free the hostages, because what we wrote in the letter, very delicately, I must say, because we're thinking all the time about the parents of the hostages. We, as a credible organization, got this information. We have directed, as I said, resources, and we told them all the resources we had, not by the names, but how we got this information. And we were naive to believe that the Red Cross has enough power to do something. We know after 100 days that the Red Cross has limited power in this kind of thing. In that time, we thought if we press them and give them this kind of information, maybe it will help. As we all know, it did not help. And after that, slowly in Israel, the information started to come out. How? What is the information that exists? I want to tell that and to be very accurate. Most of the biggest amount of information, as I said, is not from directly from victims, but mainly from first responders, also some from soldiers, policemen, as I said, the witness, and also from people who were in the party and came to rescue, and they saw the bodies, the dead bodies, the corpses, and also a few photos that exist, as much as I know. So what is the information that exists? Very few days afterwards, in Israel, there's a special organization that does not exist in other countries in the world, and I will explain it to you and for your audience, because they are first responders. There is an organization in Israel which was established because of Jewish tradition and Jewish religion. This organization is called Zaka, Z-A-K-A. This organization is an NGO, not a governmental organization, which their mission is to put to bring Jewish people to burial and not let any flesh that somebody, for example, is injured or there's a car accident or a terrorist attack. Everything should go into burial. This is according to the Jewish tradition. So what they do, unfortunately, as I said, we have terror attacks. They go to the field, to the scene, and collect everything which is there and put in big bags, some kind of plastic bags, and they put everything to burial. So this organization is used to be called when there are terrorist attacks. Now, what happened? A lot of bodies, 1,100, I don't, something like that, bodies in one day. That's a huge amount of bodies. So first of all, the Zaka people, which were called to the field, they were called to go to the kibbutz Be'eri, kibbutz Nahal Oz, kibbutz Kfar Aza, all of these places where there were a lot of people murdered, and they have to collect them and to put them to burial. They were also called to the Nova party scene, the Nova party, which took place in the nature, just near these kibbutzim. The many young people were killed there, and their bodies were there. So what their volunteers who do very important work, and they volunteer to do it, they went there, and some of them were first responders. They saw first the bodies, and I heard, and everyone in Israel heard testimonies from these Zaka people. They came and they said, I entered a house in a kibbutz. I opened the sheltered room. I saw a mother and one child dead, shot in a sheltered room. But outside the sheltered room, I saw another teenage daughter without her clothes. Now, you ask yourself, how come in the house this scene was found? How come there was a girl outside the sheltered room without the clothes? And you can imagine that somebody tore off her underpants. But this was not one scene. This was in many places. These Zaka volunteers entered places. Many people were killed there, and they saw dead bodies of women. Some of these bodies were shot in their intimate organs. Some of the bodies, and I know about at least two testimonies, they found a grenade in a dead woman's body in her vagina. And in another intimate organ, they found a knife. Yeah, I won't get into a lot of details, but it was found. How come somebody did that? But the thing is, and I think your audience should understand, it was not one case in one kibbutz or in one body. It was many places, many kibbutzim, and many people in the Nova party. Men, by the way, also were shot at their intimate organs. Also, women and men were shot in the face as to damage, in a cruel way, not to that you won't be able to see who was this person. Like it's a hate kind of shooting is hate, but it's the destroying how you look like. So the Zaka people were the first people who entered these houses, and they saw things they could not believe. And I want to tell you something which is so tragic, or sad, but we must understand that because of the amount of bodies, the forensic system in Israel could not start its work. I can tell you, I talked with one of the important journalists in the world, one of the big news that covered the atrocities that took place in Ukraine. She told me, she's not Jewish, she does not live in Israel, she came to cover this story. She told me that she was very surprised about the Zaka organization, because she told me in Ukraine, when she went there, they've got the forensic people who do this kind of job come and take rape kits. But what happened in Israel, first of all, nobody even thought this kind of thing could happen. And they came to the field and they saw these bodies. Nobody thought to take a rape kit and do a rape test, because there were so many bodies. And the most important thing is that in that time was, first of all, as I said, according to the Jewish tradition, to put the person as quickly as possible to burial, because this is part of the Jewish tradition. But also, you will have to understand there were a lot of parents there. Imagine 1,000, over 1,000 people were killed through the families. So imagine it's 5,000, 6,000 people to try to see if the relatives are alive or dead, all calling the police, calling everybody, a lot of pressure, a lot of mess. And we never had this kind of capacity to deal with such a horrible catastrophe. So the forensic team in Israel, we've got a very good forensic institute. What did they do? It's very sad when I will tell you what they do. They did do. They did not have the possibility to use the rape kits. And as I said, nobody thought about it. But what they did, actually, there were many people who were burnt. Nothing, and they had to identify who are these burnt people. Who are they? According to their teeth, maybe DNA test. So all of the forensic doctors in Israel, they took the most severe cases with the purpose of knowing who this person was. You know that up till this last month, we still had people identified, because the cruelty that was done there was so horrific. The hate, and also the joy of the Hamas terrorists to do these atrocities. If someone watched these movies, and I watched many clips by the GoPro that were taken by the GoPros of the Hamas terrorists. It's all on Telegram, so many of the things everybody can watch. You could see their joy, their happiness of killing people in such a savage, brutal, sadistic way. So the forensic doctors in Israel, and it's not such a big institution, all the work was to identify who is this little child, who is this woman without a head, who is this other man without a limbs, because they cut off limbs, and they did really horrible things. So this is why we do not have any forensic evidence. No rape kits. The other people, so as I said, soldiers, I know from my friends' sons, I have a daughter in the army, and my friends also have kids in the army. I heard from my friends who are mothers, some telling stories, what they saw. Mainly, what all these people saw are women with their clothes torn off. Some of them, their legs wide open, and very horrific things that happen to their body because of the brutality. And I do not want to talk about it in this podcast. It's too hard and it's too sad. So, and another first responders are paramedics that came to save lives. They also saw all of these people gave testimonies. So I say many times that the corpses were shouting. The bodies are telling a silent story. They cannot speak, but you can see it's not one, it's two, it's dozens. How much? Israel, nobody counted, because as I told you, there was a lot of chaos. So people were quickly taken to a big army base, identified, and then put into burial. So nobody did this counting. As I understood, also the Zaka volunteers are not allowed to take photographs of the bodies. So I heard that one or two did some private initiative and took photographs, but it's not a systematic evidence. But still, this is like a puzzle, and the puzzle is built up of the people. Also, one of the testimonies that were heard a lot about was given by a woman, and you can Google her name afterwards. Very a woman whose name is Sherry Mendes. She's an architect. This is her profession from Jerusalem, and she is a religious woman. And she told us, and I spoke with her, but she was quoted by many journalists and in many places, that she was a volunteer. That, as I told you, according to the Jewish religion, you have to put the people quickly to burial. But another thing exists. According to the Jewish religion, it's more modest that the women deal with the woman bodies and that the men deal with the man bodies. So a man will not see a body of a woman before she's buried. It's to give her the honor, even if she is killed, to give the body an honor. So Sherry is one of a group of a few women that was actually trained by the Israel Rabbinical Institute in the army. That her job was that if a soldier was killed, she and her friends who are volunteers will give the last honor to the body and will take care of the bodies of the woman, and the man will take care of the bodies of the men. So she was a volunteer, and her daily job was to be an architect. And suddenly 7th of October happened, and she and her colleagues were called to help. And there were a lot of women, a lot of killed women, soldiers, young teenage women, girls, women who came to in their 20s and their 30s to be in the parties, mother. And she told the media, and she told in many places, and she told me personally what she saw. She opened these bags that the Zaka people brought from the field, the big bags where the bodies were, to see. And she took out a body, and then she saw many bodies who were mutilated. Many times she said this kind of description that you can never forget, that she saw the mutilated organs. You saw, again, a woman without clothes, with teared clothes. And suddenly she said, I saw a color. And what was the color? The manicure, the gel on the young woman, beautiful hands. And it was something of their young, being young and beautiful and taking care of themselves. So she and her friends are witnesses. Sorry, she and her friend are witnesses that saw many dead women that were harmed, mutilated, raped, abused, in a brutal way. So if you look at this puzzle, the information we have in Israel is from all of these people who dealt with the bodies or came to rescue survivors, and also saw some survivors who were injured. And you don't ask somebody who's bleeding and with alcohol if you were raped. This is not a question you ask at all. If you see somebody like that, you take him to, or you take her to the hospital and take her in the hospital. And when you take her to the hospital, and I talked with doctors in the hospitals, you do not ask directly like that, because you have to be very, what we call, trauma informed when you deal with people who suffer this kind of thing. Maybe they don't want to say. Maybe they're embarrassed. Maybe they did not digest yet what has happened. They do not acknowledge to themselves. Maybe they do not want to talk now about it. So this is why, and I think it's very important to people to understand that this is why it's so hard to talk about what happened. It's not here, Me Too. Me Too was a worldwide phenomenon, also very strong in Israel, where, of course, started in the States, where women said, yes, this guy abused me, and I'm not ashamed. This is not a story. I want to say something. To be in Israel, raped or abused by a Hamas terrorist is something that many people are ashamed of. Of course, it's not their fault, nothing to be ashamed, but they are embarrassed. And the society may look at them awkwardly. I do not think that it's supposed to be like that, but it is like that. So to confess, to say, no, I don't, and they don't. So I think, as I told you, because I know so many survivors of sexual violence, it will take so long, if ever at all, for someone to talk about this openly, maybe decades. And I want to share with you that now in Israel, 75 years after the Holocaust, only in the last decade in Israel, there were a few stories that came out and movies about sexual abuse in the Holocaust. They talked about everything, the gas chambers, the atrocities of the Nazis. And to talk about sexual violence is another story. And sometimes people do not understand that. I know many journalists from all over the world call me all the time in the first and second month. I talked with so many journalists, and I saw that many of them do not understand. They said, give me the story. I want to talk with a survivor of rape. Many. Usually the women are more understand better than men, but there are also good men that understand. But I think these journalists do not understand that the last thing that a survivor or a witness maybe would want to talk about is what happened to her. And also, the Israeli police now has two testimonies of witnesses. One of the testimonies was also published in many places. It was a testimony of a young woman. She was a witness to a horrific gang rape. Again, I'm not going to go to details. It's unbelievable what what the Hamas terrorists did to this young woman, and of course killed her. She gave a very, very detailed and accurate story. This is one, again, even to get testimonies is very hard, because people have to, again, talk about it and remember it. And just to hear about it is scary. Imagine to talk about it. It's like a nightmare. It's something that even in the movies, in the you can't even believe that human beings could be so evil. And I really, I understand, of course, that there was terror and the Hamas terrorists wanted to harm us. Okay, but even terror, which is a horrific thing, there are limits. And what we met in Israel is the most horrible portrayal of sadism and brutality and evil.
I mean, so what I've been listening to you and taking this in, and and I can think of other contexts or other conflicts, Yazidis in Iraq, where sexual violence was used, even in Ukraine, to the Holocaust that you mentioned. This isn't a new issue, right? We know that you need to be very eagerly naive to think that sexual violence hasn't been a part of conflicts throughout history, because women are. There's so many reasons why our bodies are seen in as as property, as, sexual objects when, we simply want to live and exist equally, and with dignity, and not to be, part of this disgusting, sometimes words, it's hard to find words sometimes to talk about these things. But I feel like you sharing all of this I sit here in Canada and you're in Israel, and it's, in some ways it's disgusting to me that you and the women of Israel, the victims, the people who were murdered that day, have to go to such great lengths to try and tell the world that this happened. I find that there is such a lack of dignity, and there's a great injustice in that. For me to think that, in other conflicts, what you're saying, you wouldn't have to go to these lengths to have people believe that these things happened. What is the impact of, maybe you're aware, I'm not sure, but in the, here in Canada, there is a reluctance, and I think it's an inconvenience, because the victims on October 7th were Israeli and Jewish, and this plays into greater global trends of anti-Semitism, in my opinion. But how is the rest of the world's reluctance to accept this horrific sexual violence? How does that impact the survivors in Israel, the women that you work with? But I mean, it also, on a more domestic level, because there was this movement of, believe all women. And it does a disservice to all women when certain women aren't believed because of who they are, where they live, what religion they practice. How is that impacting Israel and women in Israel and the women you work with?
I think it's like I don't even have words. It makes me very, very angry, because I'm an activist on women's issues for many years. And like you, I think it's one of the most important things in our life to give women, my daughters, my friends, my sisters, equal possibility to live and fulfill their life, and not to suffer from violence. And all of us who deal and fight domestic violence and violence against women and sexual violence, we all know how things that take place when people do not see, how easy it is to say it did not happen, because usually sexual violence is not out there. It's in the house, in a date, between
behind closed doors, right?
Behind closed doors, exactly.
The power dynamic is that it's hidden.
Exactly. But now this is different. This kind of sexual violence did not take place only behind closed doors of the houses in the specific kibbutzim. It also took place in the party. This is one of, by the way, if you read literature about sexual violence in conflict zones, it is really characterized by gang rapes, by happening when other people can bear witness. It has specific characteristics, and it's like, what I feel, it's like, many times when a survivor comes to me and she has a court case, and we know in Israel how hard it is to prove to the judge that this thing happens, because it's sometimes many times the judges do believe, but the criminal law is very complicated. You have to have evidence. It's very hard to have evidence. You have to prove that you said no. Okay, but here, no woman will go in the field without underpants. And if you have dozens like that in many places, what is the explanation for that? Even if you did not take a rape kit, how can you explain broken parts of the body, of dead bodies? How can you, again, it's very hard graphics. I really want not to trigger anybody. How can you explain that? There's no explanation. These things don't happen from, it's not magic. it is human beings who created this evil. And I think that like the Me Too, unless you're a Jew slogan, which is very correct, is very, very sad, because I think that, the women who are quiet, they will pay the price. Because I don't want to say a specific country, but women who live in some country, there are also Islamists and extremists in all over the world, yeah. And these kind of behavior of extreme, not everybody, of course, extreme people who are terrorists, who want to kill. If they did it to us, they can do it to people in Europe and to women in Canada. So being quiet and questioning, like what happened in one of your universities, that is the head of this rape crisis center in Alberta, I think, university, she said, she said it didn't happen. Who is she to say that? What does she know? She doesn't know nothing. She's ignorant. And also, a woman who works with sexual violence dares to talk like that. Shame on her, really, shame on her. Because if she said it didn't happen, when something will happen to her or one of her friends, other people will say the same. So, what this catastrophe that happened in Israel, and now we see anti-Semitism and politics hindering all of our battles of women to be sisters of each other, no matter who you belong to, if you're a Jew or a Christian or a Muslim. By the way, we, the Association of Rape Crisis Centers, one of our rape crisis centers in Arab rape crisis centers. And when this thing happened, I talked with my colleague, who is the manager of this rape crisis center, and she said, being a feminist, I believe in women. And this is a very important thing. Politics, we have a lot of politics, but put this aside, when women are so brutalized. And I really hope that all of the women that were silent, like, for example, Dr. Sima Bachos, which is the head of the UN Women, and her origin is from Jordan. She's a Jordanian woman. When I read her CV, she's a very talented woman, did a lot of things, but did not speak for many, many days. And the UN Women did not give any appropriate response. And now soon Pramila Pratton, who is the head a very high official in the UN that deals with sexual violence and conflict, she's supposed to come to Israel, and she finally did say, give a statement. This is maybe a symbol of a change, but I want to say something. As an Israeli and as a Jewish woman, and as a daughter of a Holocaust survivor, and it's very important for me to say that, because if you think about genetics, my mother, who survived as a young girl, she survived because she was talented enough to survive. She fought. So being myself a daughter of a professor of biology, my father was a professor of biology, he always said that the Jewish people have some kind of genes. And one of our genes is to survive many horrible things that happened to us in history. So I really believe, and we're smart and we know how to fight, and we won't let the world be quiet. And it's a hard thing because now we see how politics erase feminism, erase sisterhood, erase the truth. But I really believe and hope that it will change.
Well, and I mean, as a feminist and as someone who believes in diversity, equity, and inclusion, and I've said this before and I'll say it again with you now, is that I don't believe, and as an intersectional feminist as well, if your intersectional feminism excludes rather than includes all, you are not practicing intersectional feminism. You cannot simply leave out Jewish women or Israeli women because of, a political ideology or your hot takes on the conflict. And, I mean, I find the hypocriticalness of, supporters that we have seen over the last couple of years, specifically in support of the women, life, and freedom movement in Iran. My husband is Iranian. I am a dual citizen of Iran. I I want people to understand that the government of Iran is the supporter of Hamas, of Hezbollah, of the Houthis. And if you are on the side of women, life, and freedom, then you are not on the side of the Iranian regime. You are not on the side of Hamas. You are not on the side of Hezbollah, and you are not on the side of Houthis. And there are protests, seemingly daily here in Canada, with flags being waved of people. There was a man this weekend in the U.S. who said that the massacres must continue. No. The sexual violence and the massacres, there is a place for people to solve the broader political conflicts, and it is not at the expense of raping women, girls, and people. That is absolutely must be off limits in our society. And it really pains me that we can, send people to the moon, and we can, do all of these kinds of things and fund, wars, and, do the most kind of obnoxious things with money in the world. And yet we can't we can't find solutions. We can't educate people to respect girls and women, and people to not commit sexual violence, to simply respect the dignity of women in the world. You can have conflict, but there are rules to that conflict, and women and sexual violence should be strictly off limits and something that is strictly forbidden in our society. So, I mean, I want to wrap up. Honestly, I could talk to you for a very long time, but I also feel that in having to have these conversations with people like me is also traumatizing to you. And I'm very sorry about that. I really wish that, again, that we weren't even having this conversation, but in the context of what you know about what's happening on a broader global scale, and the kind of denialism around October 7th and the sexual violence, and the justification of using sexual violence to, in some cases, like the case that, what we hear people saying, what can my Canadian government, what can other governments do? How can just ordinary women like you and me and our friends and our colleagues and the women in our run groups and our book clubs and our, the moms that we see, what can we do? What do we need to be asking our government to do to support the victims of sexual violence on October 7th?
I think maybe one of the most important thing is, first of all, to talk about it, like you're talking with me right now, because this horrible thing that happened, again, in a democratic, Western, developed country, could happen everywhere. And as I told you, I never thought, I'm so many years active in the women's, the feminist initiatives in Israel, and nobody here thought it could ever happen, that somebody one day will open your house, enter, and do what they did. So the first thing is really to talk about it and understand, if it happened in Israel, it can happen in other places. People, groups become extreme and do horrible things, like we see all the time terrorist things happen in other countries, like in France and Charles Hebdo, and I don't have to name these places. So speaking about it and talking that this is war crimes and atrocities and crimes against human beings, it's something to be said. We should not live in. We have developed in our life. We're not barbarians, and we should not accept this kind of barbaric behavior, even if there are disputes. Disputes happened, and we are just citizens. We are not commanders of armies. I wish all of us here, we do not want the war. We want to live peacefully, and I'm sure many Palestinians also want to live peacefully. Not all, because many of them were also part of this terror attack, many civilians, but I'm sure that there are also good people there that are against what had happened. Talk about it and push the government to declare that they are and support the survivors and state that this is a war crime. It's very, very important. And again, this kind of understanding, that these things can happen again in modern history, and it's something that everybody should understand. I mean, I'm sure that for Canadian women, this is something that happened in this little Israel in the Middle East, this country, which is so, it's not Canada, but Israel, everyone who's been to Israel understands that this country is like any other country in modern Europe or United States with the special characteristics. And to help the survivors is the most important thing, to give validation to what has happened. And also, I do say, and like, for example, the French government now is asking to support, is considering supporting us, the rape crisis centers, to help. And I think I'm not to help is to talk about it, acknowledge it, and also to support organizations in Israel. There's a lot of need now in Israel, for example, of treatment, trauma treatment, and people who can give therapy, and many people have to be trained to give special therapy because of this horrific traumas. And I didn't mention, but there are now still 15 women being hostage in Gaza. Most of them are in their 20s. And the hostages returned back from captivity were saying out loud these women were abused. So the world should cry, shout. The Canadian government should pressure, do whatever they can to make Hamas release these hostages. First of all, the woman, but everybody else, because these women are suffering every day, and this is horrific.
Yeah, it's day 101, I believe, and there are estimated to be 136 hostages, including likely some that are not alive, and they need to be returned. They need to be brought back alive. I just want to make the point for anyone who's listening and is like, oh, wants to, label this as being a conversation that's Islamophobic, for example, or, against, being, not going into discussions around the experience of Palestinians and the conflict that's happening right now. And I think that we can have you have to be able to hold multiple truths at one time, and we should be able to have conversations on topics without having to necessarily make it an all-encompassing conversation. And what I mean by that is that we can have a conversation about what happened on October 7th and the sexual violence. And we can also at another time have conversations around the sexual violence and conflicts in Gaza with Palestinians, because the perpetrators of October 7th, the men of Hamas that committed these atrocities, who went back to Gaza, are, fathers, sons, cousins, brothers, husbands.
They could also, by the way, do it to their women. If they did it to us, they will do that to the Arab, Muslim, Palestinian woman.
And I wish that we could say that before October 7th, there had never been an instance of sexual violence in the world, that women have been able to walk the streets, run with headphones, walk to their cars without holding their keys in their hands, that no woman before this had ever faced any sort of sexual violence. We know that that is not true. It happens every place in every corner of the world. on a daily basis, and that we collectively as a society at the city, town, national, global level allow that to happen says so much about what our priorities are, that we aren't willing to eliminate that when we are willing to make significant investments in other aspects of the world. And so, I really hope that for someone who listened to this conversation, who came into it, expecting something, or heard something that was like, no, that reaffirms the bias that I have. And whether that be conscious or unconscious, that you stretch yourself and allow yourself to think that no matter, honestly, like the bottom line is, no matter who this happens to, Muslim, Jew, Christian, Baha'i, whoever, it should just be unacceptable. And that we should have zero tolerance for this in our society. But do not deny the events of October 7th. You are doing a disservice to women. You're doing a disservice to feminism. You're doing a disservice to anyone who may speak out at a future time about sexual violence that they faced, whether it's here in Calgary, in Alberta, in Canada, in Israel, in Germany, in Iran, Kenya, anywhere. This is something that goes beyond any border. And ask yourself, you shouldn't have to know someone who has been directly impacted by sexual violence to say that it's wrong. And if you can't say that it's wrong, and you do deny the events of October 7th, then that is about something happening within you, and not about, it does not mean that it did not happen.
There's nothing to add. You're saying exactly what should be done and how people should think. I totally agree with what you're saying.
Well, I wish that we didn't have to have this conversation, because people, questioning to the very point that that there was now a former director of a sexual assault center in the province that I live that denied the sexual violence of October 7th, like, honestly, is a shame to me. To know that there are still people advocating for the continued massacre of people, that of Jews and Israelis, that none the Israel-Palestine conflict cannot be sorted out on Instagram, Facebook, or anywhere on social media. It needs to be done in rooms with people from both sides, speaking together, humanizing each other, with a willingness to move forward. And so this internet activism that we're seeing in denying October 7th does a disservice, not just to this, but to all future events, honestly. And it's upsetting. And I can't imagine, I can't imagine what it's like to be in your shoes on a daily basis, knowing that this is going on, and it's, a continual thing, for people in Palestine and in Israel. And but those larger questions, we need smart people to get in a room together and sort this out. In the meantime, let's believe what happened on October 7th was truly atrocious, and we need to acknowledge that.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah. So, is there anything else that you'd like to share?
I'm sure time will pass, and history and the truth will come out, because there's nothing strong but the truth. And true, I want to believe that the truth will win. It will take time, and all this internet activism of young people who get the information from the internet. I also have kids in these ages. It's, of course, this is one of the main ways, but it's not enough. And this internet activism is not based on real systematic information and evidence, and people who say all kinds of slogans which they don't understand what they're saying. I hope one day when they grow up and understand more, maybe they will not talk like that. But I do believe in the truth, and the truth in the end will win. Otherwise, as a society, as a human society, we don't have future. So I want to believe that most of the people will believe the truth, and this horrible atrocities will become known and acknowledged by the world.
Orit, thank you so much for speaking with me today. And I will continue to pay attention to the stories and continue to, I mean, it's so difficult, but finding ways to acknowledge what happened, ask others to acknowledge that as well, and then also to hold the Canadian government to account in ways that are actually practical and outcome oriented, evidence based in supporting the victims of October 7th.
Thank you.
Thank you.